In 1976, the Augustus family had come a long way from their humble beginnings. Jacob and Grace had built a strong foundation not only for themselves, but for their three children, Marcus, Joy, and Malcolm. But as Jamaica's political winds began to blow stronger, those winds would carry Marcus to new places and bring new challenges to their doorstep. Kingston in 1976 was a city alive with opportunity, but it was also teeming with unrest. Marcus had insisted on going there, seeking out something larger than what Greenhill could offer him. He was 14, restless, and full of dreams. Unlike his father, he had no interest in carpentry. He was fascinated by mechanics, electricity, and how things worked. He wanted to study, to learn a trade, and Jacob couldn't deny him that. You have my blessing, Jacob had said, standing in the yard as Marcus packed his belongings into a suitcase. But remember, Marcus, Kingston is a different place. Keep your head straight and remember where you come from. Grace, holding Malcolm and Joy close, fought back tears. Take care of yourself, son, but go and pray for you every day. With that, Marcus boarded a crowded bus heading for the capital, his eyes set on the future. Jacob watched him disappear down the road, his heart heavy but proud. He knew this was a necessary part of life. Children had to leave, had to find their own way, but it didn't make the parting any easier. In Kingston, Marcus found a world that was a far cry from the quiet hills of St. Anne. The city buzzed with energy, but it also pulsed with tension. The 1970s had brought Jamaica to a crossroads. Michael Manley, the charismatic prime minister, had ushered in sweeping changes with his democratic socialist policies. The government was focused on land reform, education, healthcare, and a vision of self reliance for the Jamaican people. But not everyone was on board. Political divisions ran deep, and the lines between the two major parties, the People's National Party and the Jamaican Labour Party, were becoming battle lines. Marcus enrolled in a trade school, studying mechanics and electronics just as he had dreamed. But as the months passed, he couldn't ignore the undercurrent of danger that ran through the streets of Kingston. The political divide wasn't just a matter of policy, it was tearing communities apart. Gangs aligned with either the PMP or the JLP controlled neighborhoods, and violence often erupted between them. Kingston, easy, my brother, Marcus's friend Devon warned him one evening. They had just finished a long day at the trade school and were sitting on the steps of their boarding house watching the city below. You have to know the right people and stay out of the wrong places. Marcus nodded, taking in his friend's words. He wasn't interested in politics or getting involved in any gang affiliations. His focus was his studies, on learning his trade, and eventually finding a job that would allow him to help his family back in Greenhill. But the politics of the time were hard to avoid. The streets of Kingston were often filled with protests, strikes, and rallies. The economy was struggling, and so were the people. Basic goods were scarce, and the prices were rising. Many Jamaicans felt like the promises of independence had not been fully realized. Back in Greenhill, the Augustus family was feeling the strain of the nation's challenges as well. Business for Jacob's carpentry shop had slowed. The tourism industry, once booming, was beginning to falter due to the political instability and rising crime rates. Fewer tourists meant fewer orders for Jacob's custom furniture, and the money wasn't coming in as it used to. We're going to be all right, Grace would say, always the voice of reassurance. We survived worse than this. Jacob nodded, though he couldn't shake the growing worry in his chest. With Marcus in Kingston, he felt the weight of not being able to assure his well being. Joy was now a bright, curious 11-year-old, and Malcolm was just 5, too young to understand the shifting tides around him. The government's land reform initiatives had stirred excitement, but also conflict. In nearby towns, people were fighting over land, and the redistribution of property was causing tensions to flare. Jacob knew people who had lost their farms or homes in the process, and it worried him. He had worked hard for what he had, and the thought of losing it all because of political maneuvering gnawed at him. A new level of tension gripped Jamaica. The upcoming general elections were expected to be the most contentious yet. Manley's government had pushed for bold reforms, but the opposition, led by Edward Seaga and the JLP, argued that the country was slipping into chaos. The streets of Kingston became a battleground, with political violence on the rise. Marcus, now accustomed to life in Kingston, tried his best to stay out of trouble, but one night, as he was walking home from trade school, he found himself caught in the middle of a clash between two rival gangs, one aligned with the PNP, the other with the JLP. Run, Marcus! Devon shouted, pulling him into a nearby alley as the sounds of gunfire echoed through the streets. Heart pounding, Marcus crouched behind a rusted fence, his mind racing. He had heard about the violence, but this was the first time he had come face to face with it. It was terrifying, and it made him question his decision to stay in the city. After that night, Marcus started to reconsider his path. The trade school was valuable, yes, but the dangers of Kingston were becoming too real. He missed the peace of Greenhill, the steady rhythm of life in the countryside. He missed his family. Back in Greenhill, Jacob and Grace were facing their own crisis. The political tensions had spread beyond Kingston. One day, Jacob was in Brownstown buying supplies when he overheard a heated argument between two men, one a supporter of the PNP, the other a JLP loyalist. Before he knew it, the argument turned violent and the small town square erupted into chaos. Jacob managed to avoid getting hurt, but the incident left him shaken. If this kind of division could reach even the quiet towns of St. Anne, how long before it spread further? As 1977 arrived, Jacob and Grace decided it was time to bring Marcus home. The country was in the midst of a state of emergency declared by Manley's government, and the violence in Kingston had reached new heights. Jacob sent word to Marcus, urging him to return to Greenhill. When Marcus came home that summer, he was a changed boy. The bright-eyed boy who had left in search of opportunity had been replaced by someone serious, guarded. Kingston had taught him hard lessons, but it had also shown him the value of home. "I'm glad me come back," Marcus said quietly as they sat on the veranda one evening. "Kingston no easy, Papa. Me learn my trade, but the place, it different." Jacob nodded, understanding. Greenhill might not have the same opportunities, but it have peace, and sometimes that were way more. The Augustus family was back together again, but the country around them continued to shift. The political unrest would eventually calm, but the scars would remain.